What's up, folks? Casual Dad here, and we're going to kind of mix things up a little bit. I wanted to take a minute to look at super heavies in the game. Now, the developers for Warhammer Combat Cards just recently released a roadmap talking about some of the things they're developing, and one of the big things they're doing is working on a permanent game mode that'll use 400 deck points. So that'll be actually the Apocalypse modifier that we see in campaigns that will let you use your super heavy cards, which at the moment I believe you can't use in your general ladder games. Now, what are super heavy cards? So we're going to look at this right here, and then we're going to filter by cost first, apply, and then I'm going to search for the keyword Lord of War. Now, we shouldn't see any warlords here, and that's perfect, we don't. So we see just the top cost here. And I did want to highlight that there are some Lord of War keyword cards that we can actually use in ladder play. So I could be wrong about that, but I was trying to figure out whether I was or not. I think you can just play them in any mode. But I only have a couple of them, so sorry about that. I should know that. But anyway, some of these are fairly familiar. This one you're probably going to see quite a bit, the Mad Mangler, and that's one I would put up there as one of the better cards. They keep changing its secondary trait, so it's always got Barrage, but they had Precision Shot, which is absurd, and then it got Death Blow, which is also bad, and now it's got Shields, which is also bad. This thing just has such a ridiculous set of stat points that, like, it's a very, very scary piece, and to have to punch through shields to get at it is scary. Now, it does roll in at 85 deck points, but a lot of Orc Warlords are quite cheap, and a lot of Orc cards are quite cheap and still fairly competitive. So this is one you're going to see more often than most. And then all of the others you do kind of see sprinkled in here and there. This one you'll see in some Canon S decks because of that big Game Hunter. Pretty solid card, but it's kind of tough to fit in there because you want those to be full decks with a lot of stuff in them. Another one that I plan to use more as it levels up is this guy. Once you get to level 9, this thing is terrific in several Chaos decks. I actually like it in Huron decks because you can build up different attack types and then Death Blow, but that combination of really high melee plus a bunch of hit points and then Berserk is really, really good. And with that Death Blow added on top, that's just gravy, especially if you're able to actually build up that attack before it blows up. So he's one I intend to see. Then looking through the list, we've seen a quick smattering of cards popped up for every individual faction. I'm going to run through them real fast, but not take too long with them. The newest one, I believe, being this guy that's just dropped in the store right now, and it's one you can see quite a bit. But some of the older ones, let's see, they're roughly in order. No, and some of the ones we're most familiar with, we've seen the Titans in campaigns for a long time. That being the Tyranid ones, the Orc ones, those Titans have been around for a while. And then a lot of the newer cards have been added to kind of flesh that out. So all the factions are going to have a couple different super heavy options to choose from. And we'll go through real quick. So in the campaign we just finished, the Necron campaign, we saw several of these. Now this one, having almost 500 hit points and max level Medicae by itself is pretty terrifying. But then also the thing about super heavies is one of the best way to deal with them is other super heavies. So any super heavy that has Big Game Hunter is going to be one that's going to be impactful right off the bat, especially one that has this high attack stats both in melee and ranged. You're looking at a card with enough hit points to tank a lot of hits for some scary shots, and then also hitting harder back against the cards you would tend to send against it. So this is a tricky one. This is one you want to hit with a target acquired from off lane, which actually, so super heavy versus super heavy is one way to take these down. The number 2 best way is to use target acquired and then hit it with Big Game Hunter from out of lane. So that's probably the way I would deal with this one in particular. And these all are going to look very, very scary from the context of a ladder play, but in the Apocalypse game mode, that 400 point mode, they'll be somewhat more even because you'll have so many scary things to send against them too. This one doesn't have a melee attack at all, so I'm already less scared of it, but if I'm seeing that correctly, that is a 6? No, that's a 5. So it's got over 500 health at max level, does a bunch of damage, and does have that precision shot, which can be very scary. But this comes in at such a high price point, and then also only having that range stat, it's good. But I think that this one is significantly better because it does have the melee stat. It's not quite as durable. The hit points are similar, but the cost is less. It's got an equivalent ranged attack with Big Game Hunter, and then also has that hefty melee attack. So I do think that one just stands out. This one, though, kind of dominates both of them. Still only has the ranged attack. It does have regen. It's got more hit points and then has both a 200 ranged attack and Big Game Hunter. It still is missing that melee attack, which will make it vulnerable to some counters, but still is a really scary piece. And if you played this at the higher levels of that last campaign, you saw how much of a beating it could take. So that's something to watch out for. This, of course, is one we've seen before. It does have similar attack stats, slightly lower hit points than some of those, but also comes in at a higher price point and does have that melee attack. So this is one of the better ones, especially since it is in orcs. Orcs have cheaper warlords, and just can build up very quickly. One thing that scares me about a lot of these is Wartsnagga. Wartsnagga can take the absolute most expensive super heavies and then sprinkle in some endless, and if you start laying 15% attack bonuses on these things, they add up real quick. And Wartsnagga himself is so cheap that you can really, really fill the deck. So watch out for that. Next up is the Chaos Knight. I always really like this one. This one comes in with a whopping 100 melee attack, max level of 4 shields, and Big Game Hunter. This is the one that you will send against other super heavies. It is designed to go toe-to-toe with the big nasties and take them down in fights. So this is a great one. I really like it. And it's Chaos, which is one of my favorite factions, so that works out great. This one is going to be fairly similar to this is the Morkanaut, so it's similar to the Gorkanaut. Much higher price point, more expensive, has higher hit points and shields and just Big Game Hunter. I do think, especially in orcs, this one is a lot less threatening because it doesn't have that barrage. Still good, of course, but I think the Gorkanaut is better, even at that price point. The fact that you can take both is kind of nice. And this, again, has that same issue that I just talked about with Wartsnagga, being able to beef it up. But on the whole, I think you're better with the Gorkanaut. The Harridan. Oh, boy. This thing has been in Tyranid campaigns for a long time. Of course, you play against it, and then they suddenly let Tyranid players actually have access to it, and that's a whole different deal. It's got max level fear, clearly intended to be a ranged shooting card, and a ranged super heavy is something that Tyranids definitely need to kind of add some flexibility to the faction. Great in a Turvangon deck, absolutely money in a Zemut deck with that shooting bonus, but does have the melee attack. So you could put this in a Parasite deck or in a Gosar deck and have it actually directly feed into the theme. So it's definitely not wasted in a non-ranged deck, even if it does have the main ranged attack. So great piece. And with that fear and that many hit points, this is one to watch out for. The Titans, the super heavies that have fear, because of the sheer volume of hit points they have, that is super powerful. And that's something that you can put directly against a Big Game Hunter and practically negate the bonus damage. So that's another one you could put up against other Titans that could go toe-to-toe. Does not have the same offensive output, but it's fairly close to the ones that we saw. And the reason I'm looking at these at max level is that's kind of the comparison I want to have. My personal suspicion, grain of salt, my personal suspicion is that the Apocalypse game mode is going to have max card levels, just because that's the way it'll make the most sense for the most players. It's the way they've done the Armageddon modifier before. And even if people are paying money to pick up super heavies, the probably will have level 3 at most. And if you're running a level 3 super heavy, it doesn't feel worth the points. And if you suddenly run against someone who dropped $1,000 and has a level 5 one, that's pretty feels bad. And I feel like, for me personally, if you can buy one rank of a super heavy and have it be max level in that 400 deck point mode, that would actually encourage me to buy more super heavies rather than looking at the amount of money that goes into buying one now. Quick interlude. We'll see if we have to jump back to this. Because look at this thing. So I can pay $20 for one copy of this, or I can pay $100 for 6 copies of this thing. And what is that? 6 copies gives you, I mean, that's what, level 3? Level 4? I mean, it's not much. So $100 to get that, it's very unlikely people are going to do that. You're a whole lot more likely to see more people drop the 20 for a couple copies of the different super heavies, which of course will add up. But still, that's something I'm definitely kind of considering in my argument there. Gonna keep cruising through, gonna try to make this not too long of a video. This one, the Wraith Knight is one of my favorite models in the game. I was so excited when they came out. And this one just sings to me. Having both Fear and Furious Charge with those melee stats, like, oh, it's beautiful. It's such a departure from most of the Eldar cards, being that heavy melee. And in a super heavy, it's just very, very cool. So this would be really fun to run with an Avatar. Yeah, so this guy in an Avatar deck would get a little bit crazy. But of course, in the Apocalypse mode, where things have a base 200 attack, the flat 15 bonus is not going to be that impactful. So it's still fun, but yeah, Could probably actually, with this one, is the one you put in the Lilith deck if she's not banned. Because that Furious Charge for 200, kill it, pop back to your hand, and do it again is pretty terrifying. Then the next Wraith Knight, it's funny that these two points-wise ended up right next to each other, is the ranged one. I would be inclined to put both in a deck. This does swaps Fear for regen and swaps Furious Charge for Barrage, and then also, of course, flips the melee and ranged attack stats. Coming in at one of the higher price points, it's a very cool card. And I'm not sure how these are really balanced for Warlords, because we're looking at high attack types, and one of the higher costs of the highest cost we've looked at so far, and somewhat middling hit points. So these are going to be fairly fragile compared to the other super heavies, and that's definitely something to keep in mind when you start running these. Next up we have the Brass Scorpion, a Forge World model that's another really interesting piece, and has that death blow. I think first of the super heavies we've seen, or the first of the kind of newer upper end Lords of War that has death blow. And death blow with a base 200 melee attack. Again, actually at the lower hit points point, which is interesting. But it has that Furious Charge, which hit extremely hard, and then also that death blow. Makes this a really nasty piece, because of course people want to get rid of it, but then they also don't. So, watch out for this one if you're up against Gloggothrox. That is one point about the super heavy 400 point deck mode. If you drop Gloggothrox in front of some of these guys, knock their attacks down by 20, 30, 40%, yeah, then they will very quickly just kind of sit there flailing and stuff, and then they'll be hitting like wet noodles. So, getting into the Imperial Guard Storm, what's that? I don't remember what the tanks are called. I'll remember that. But the super heavy Imperial Guard tanks, this one always I thought was funny. It's sort of the bulldog of super heavy tanks with that teeny tiny mouth. Coming in at our first triple digit cost card, 600 hit points, and 142 range damage with Barrage, which is exceptional, and then Taunt, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but if you've got 600 hit points, why not? And that's not the last time we're going to see a super heavy with Taunt. I don't know whether that's a handicap or a feature, but it is pretty cool. I like the mechanic of that, and that makes him a really interesting piece to play with Creed, who benefits from losing cards. And this one's going to take long enough to go down that it's probably going to run out of Taunt before it dies. So, interesting piece. And then we have this guy, the new guy. This is the Baneblade. That's the name I was trying to remember. Comes in at a similar price point, but trades Taunt for Big Game Hunter, which with 162 range damage and Barrage seems better. And something I want to highlight with this guy is that if you have a secondary trait, if you have Big Game Hunter as a secondary trait, if you're hitting the center card, and either the card to the right or the left of the one you're hitting is worth 40 or more points, that will trigger your Big Game Hunter bonus damage for the entire attack, not just the overflow that goes to that. So that is something to watch out for. So yeah, this guy can hit particularly hard, and because of that Barrage and Big Game Hunter combo, is also quite good at dealing with other super heavies, especially at 600 health. Although it does come in at 104 points, but that's just going to keep going up from here. In the home stretch, this one terrifies me. Has one of the highest base range stats, has 400 hit points, which is on the low side, but has Fear. This thing is scary, especially in a Shaz-O deck, who I've already said is probably the most powerful Tau Warlord. This guy is a absolute monster. This, I think, may be the best of the super heavies because of the interaction with the Warlords. So this guy in a Dark Strider deck where you can move him, have him free fire. This guy in a Shaz-O deck where he gets flat buffs to offense and then rotates out defense. Really good. Or Onva, because of Fear reducing incoming damage, this guy could really rack up an impressive amount of damage. So that's 3 of the Tau Warlords loving this guy. Yeah, I'm glad it comes in at a lower hit points value, because it's going to be a problem in these deck modes. And then next up, of course, we have Shields. Card cost is going up, offensive output is going up, trait combos are getting a little bit silly. So this combination of 500 hit points, 230 range damage, and Big Game Hunter and Shields on a legendary card for going up to 4 shields, this thing is incredibly hard to shift. In a different way than that Fear card, but still, like, this one's scary. I haven't seen any of these super heavies be psychic, and I haven't seen any of them do Psionic Blast. They do have a lot of Barrage for clearing shields, but not the Psionic Blast is going to be better for clearing shields because it will clear shields even if you don't actually make an attack or take any damage back. So yeah, I wonder if we're going to see that at some point, but we haven't so far. This one is quite good, and especially in an Akaran deck where it's like, oh, we killed it. Oh, no, we didn't. Yeah, it's a little silly. I'm probably going to laugh about pretty much all of these, just because in the context of current ladder play, they are absurd. Oh, we have the Stompa. Also, the most explosive real-life model in the entire Games Workshop range because of all those little pieces under high pressure. If you so much as tap this thing on a fridge or on a sink, it'll blow up all across the room. And speaking of blowing up, good God, look at those attack stats. So it trades down that range damage from the ones we've been seeing, but then ups the melee damage, and the balance of both is just truly crazy. Also has Barrage and Big Game Hunter. This one exists to do damage. Still coming in at a really high price point with hit points equal to our 90 point cards. This one is going to go down fairly quickly, but it's going to go down fighting. And this is another one I would certainly watch out for in a Wartsnagga deck, where if you start stacking up those 15% stat bonuses on this thing, it gets to be pretty monstrous. That is, however, something I should highlight with these. You don't get many of them, but you can put these Imperial Guard tanks in a Greyfax deck. I think you could fit 2 of them in a Greyfax deck and still have a decent bonus, even if you filled with Guardsmen. Which, with Barrage and Big Game Hunter, could be plenty to put them over the top. So that is something to watch out for. But where Greyfax may struggle to then not fill up the deck points and make sure you still get a bonus, Wartsnagga would struggle to fill the deck points with these guys. So I'm curious to see how the points would shake out on that one. And of course, you would need all of the super expensive super heavies and orcs to really do that. We got the Lord of Skulls coming up next. Another one that has a very high melee, which I like to see. Again, has the lower hit points, which is interesting. But then also has that Berserk and Barrage to do a lot of damage. This one is... I mean, obviously it's a powerful card. It's ridiculous to think, but at the highest price point we've seen so far, the stats are somewhat underwhelming. No death blow, no fear, no shields, no defensive tech at all, and the offense is okay, but being melee-centric with those stats, it's gonna go down pretty quickly. It feels like the cost on this is flipped with some of the others. Like the Brass Scorpion I would take over this every single day. But yeah, I could be wrong, but that's kind of my first, And it's mostly just in comparison. If I saw that thing without being next to these other cards, I would be much more impressed with it. But, yeah. Oh, good gravy. And then followed by this thing, which has Inspiring Presence to compensate for the stats being about on par with a lot of the ones we just looked at. And that's something I need to be aware of myself. As we're looking at 117, the price point range between some of the last ones we saw is only 10 points. So it's not that dramatically different, so I shouldn't expect the stats to be that dramatically different on these ones, or that much dramatically better. Very high ranged attack plus Inspiring Presence makes this one a very devastating piece, even if the melee attack is kind of middling. Does still have that Big Game Hunter, so this is another one you could send against another Super Heavy, but that will make it melt down pretty quickly, especially if that opponent is melee focused. It's fine. Not high on my list. Except that it again is in Servants, so you could put this in a Greyfax deck and have a ball. This next one is the one where when I was going into this video, this is the one I considered the best of the Super Heavies, just thinking about it and remembering it from campaigns. A lot of that, though, was nostalgia. Max level Poison and Barrage is extremely powerful, especially in the right combination of opposing decks, and you'll just poison an entire field. But in the upper level gameplay with the sheer volume of hit points you're going to be dealing with, that's not going to be as impactful as it is playing against this thing in a campaign. I do still think it's one of the better pieces, but not maybe as good as it was in my head after seeing some of the others. But still, I personally think Poison is a really cool mechanic. To see Poison and Barrage together still is very, very frightening. And this is a way you can deal with all those shielded cards. It's not going to be a quick way to deal with those shielded cards, but it will be a way to deal with those shielded cards. And if we get to max Poison, they'll be losing 32 wounds per round for both players going, which will add up very quickly. So still a good piece. It's the only one we've seen so far with Poison, and is a very iconic Tyranid piece. So yeah, I'm here for it. Next up, we have the newer Tau Warsuit. Does not have Barrage, which I'm very grateful for. Has the upper end of the range shooting we've been seeing, but also has shields and Big Game Hunter. This one's not quite as devastating as the Fear one. But still, same thing. In a Shazot deck or a Darkstrider deck where this can move around the board and hit multiple times or hit with bonus attacks is going to be absolutely devastating, just like any Tau gun line. If you're able to fit both of these two in a Tau deck, it will be truly terrifying, and I believe you can. So that's definitely one to watch. The stats do seem a little bit middling compared to some of the ones we've seen, but I think with the combination with the Warlords you can bring with this, that's not going to matter. It's still going to be a really, really devastating piece, and one of the better ones. But of the two, I would still take this one first. Comes in a good chunk cheaper, similar hit points, similar ranged attack, but has Barrage and Fear, which I think is a better combination than Shields and Big Game Hunter. So, but that's just me. Now we're on to our very last one of the newer ones released, which just cracks me up. Let's look at this silly thing. So, 510 health, by far the most expensive, has rank 4 shields and then taunt. That's pretty weird. And I'm going to be totally honest, I don't think this one's good at all. In terms of the attacks, obviously it's, a lot of hit points, but it's the most expensive card in the game at the moment. And has 185 range, no other attack type, and taunt, which will pretty much immediately strip away the shields. Now that said, it can tank probably 2 entire turns of fire from super heavies. So that's definitely a pretty big perk of it, and that's, I think, the only card in the game that can. So there's something to be said for that, and I might be underrating it, but I would rank this somewhat lower than the others. Because better than taunt is just, shooting them back harder. So so that's the whole super heavies. I am going to go ahead and remove this so we can take a look at the cost spread a little bit more and just look at some of the others that are kind of borderline. There are a lot of cards in here that don't have the Lord of War tag that still have been kind of released under the same thing, but it's been a little bit confusing where they sort of filter in normal play and sort of don't. Let's see here. And I'm actually not seeing this correctly. Let's see here. See if I have to refilter that. Okay, well, so this is one that certainly comes to mind as being on the edge of being a super heavy. The stats are about on par at a dramatically lower price point. This card is great. It is epic, and it tops out at rank 2 regen, so there's that. But this is a really, really great piece in a Zemat deck, and a good piece to send against some other super heavies because it trades at such a lower price point for similar stats. Just looking at the others, I'm looking for the 80-point Tyranid cards that I'm actually not seeing here, which it's funny that they would... Oh, okay, so this is my unowned cards. There's the difference. Okay, so these are the ones I don't own, and so that's why the price points are a little bit wonky, but like even this borderline Lord of War, I don't think anything under 70 points really qualifies, so we'll just skip that one. But if we're looking at over 80, then it certainly can. So we talked about this guy, and we've seen the Riptides a little bit. These two are recent adds. They are very powerful psychers, and they have hit points on par with the other super heavies, and their cost is actually pretty close. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And then they do have the high melee damage, but then they both, I believe, also have target acquired, which combos really well with several Tyranid warlords and is a really good utility piece for dealing with other super heavies, especially in a parasite deck. This guy, target acquired in Big Game Hunter, absolutely top-notch in a parasite deck against super heavies, and the parasite of Mortrex is going to be really strong in that 400 deck point mode, which is something I'm absolutely here for. So yeah, definitely look for these guys to make a splash. I did go ahead and pick those up and was pretty excited about it. And then also you're looking at some of these guys are cards that still kind of qualify in the super heavy range, even if they're below the margin and don't have the keyword. So expect to see them pop up quite a bit too, but they're more familiar. Video is already getting a little bit long, so we'll go ahead and stop there. But hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you are as excited as I am about that 400 point deck mode. 400 deck point mode. Yeah, but we'll see how it goes and what it looks like when it's released.